All right, so we live right now. What's good, everybody? Thanks for clicking this video. Thanks for tuning into my channel. My name's Simon Hill, Black American from Louisiana, out here in Budapest, Hungary. Today is December 6th, 2023, and we are covering the story of Venezuela invading Guyana, potentially. So they had a referendum. Basically, the people of Venezuela voted whether they're going to annex a large region of Guyana. So we're starting off today's live stream with the map. Some people don't know where Guyana is or Venezuela is. So this is the continent of South America. This is Venezuela at the top, very large country. I think it was the first country in South America to receive liberation from the Spanish. And here is Guyana right here. Guyana is a very unique country because it is half Indian, half Black African, and people that are mixed in between called Muglas and stuff like that. And it's the only English speaking nation in South America, if you don't include Trinidad and Tobago. Suriname is right next to it. It's like a Dutch speaking part. And then right next to it, we have French Guyana, which is actually a part of mainland France. So they use the euros there. They have European passports, all that sort of stuff. Before I jump into to the to the actual video, this content right here, I want to say thank you to all the new subscribers. I've been setting goals on when I'm going to go live, when I'm going to do videos, all that sort of stuff, when I hit a good subscriber amount. And I expected actually that I wouldn't do a live stream for the rest of the week because I thought I wouldn't hit my sub goals. But I'm actually growing in subscribers. So I want to say thank you to everybody. I'm going to do my next live when I hit 2,345 subs and the next video at 2,340 subs. So this will give me some time to work on some other stuff, focus on work and that sort of stuff. Let's jump into the comments. Ozzy said, let's build. We are going to build real heavy, real heavy. So we're talking about where Venezuela and Guyana are on the map. Venezuela is a country that's ran by a socialist government that has been under sanctions from the U.S. for a long time because of anti-democracy that's there and their turn towards the left and that sort of stuff, becoming very communist in nature. And Guyana is basically like a modern democratic capitalist country. They didn't go down that path that Venezuela has, which has made it sort of a pariah in South America. So I actually visited Guyana many years ago. I think around 2015, 2016, I went to Guyana. The reason I went was because it's a Muslim country, or a lot of Muslims are there. I think the country is about 50-50 Muslim Christian. And I was a very practicing Muslim at the time living in Miami. So I wanted to go to Guyana. And I thought it would be very cool because they speak English and they're Muslims. So this would be my experience to travel on my own and explore the world. Living in Miami, I got to see a lot of Venezuelans. I got to eat a lot of their food. Very good food. I love cachapas. I love arepas. Venezuelans, in my opinion, have some of the best food in Latin America, hands down, period. Venezuela is actually dope, and I would love to get the chance to go. But yeah, unfortunately, because of their problems with the U.S., we don't get the chance to just pop up in Venezuela. Some of the people might see the thumbnail and think it's clickbait. It's not clickbait, baby. We're jumping into it. So I went to Guyana and saw a lot of beautiful people, a lot of beautiful brown melanated sisters running around. Indian women are beautiful too, but a lot of these sisters down there have a special look. This is like a, picture of a very voluptuous, sensual Guyanese woman. I love my wife. Y'all don't tell her. Y'all don't tell her I'm over here doing this. But yeah, we don't want to see the Guyanese people get invaded and taken over because there are beautiful people in Guyana. We've had a long year of war and tragedy happening all over the world. We don't want to see beautiful people getting killed. We don't want this beautiful chocolate sister to get killed in Guyana, fighting for her country. And the same thing applies to Venezuela as well. You get what I'm saying? I might change the thumbnail. So if anybody's watching this video like a month from now or a week from now in the future, and you're wondering why I'm talking about these people, it's because I made the thumbnail with a beautiful Guyanese woman and a beautiful Venezuelan woman. And living in Miami, you see a lot of beautiful, Hispanic women, Latin women with that spice and that flavor. You get what I'm saying? So we don't want to see the Venezuelan people die either. We don't want to see beautiful Venezuelan women go and fight and die over land and territory in another country. It ain't worth it. It ain't worth it. We can find a peaceful resolution to this. But let's get into the topic today. Let's actually read what's happening in Venezuela and Guyana and whether black people should care, because there's a large number of black people in both countries. And similar to how I covered the Palestinian Israeli conflict, I am only concerned with black life and making sure black life remains sacred and protected. So, Venezuelan voters back Maduro's claim to a neighbor's territory. President Nicolas Maduro says an oil rich part of Guyana belongs to Venezuela. Voters agreed on Sunday, but turnout appeared to be low. So let's read this article. This is written by Genevieve Glatsky, published on December 3rd, 2023, for the New York Times. Venezuela's president, Nicolas Maduro, finds himself in a political bind. He is under pressure from the United States to hold free and fair elections after years of authoritarian rule or face a reinstatement of crippling economic sanctions. But analysts say he is unlikely to give up power and would most likely lose in a credible election. Now, Mr. Maduro has reignited a border dispute with a much smaller neighboring country in a move that seems driven, at least, in part by a desire to divert attention from his political troubles at home by stoking nationalist fervor. So I think what Nicolas Maduro is, of course, doing what every authoritarian leader does when they become unpopular, which is start a war. We saw Putin do this. Netanyahu did this to some extent. And I think, it's hypocritical for Maduro to do this, because Maduro is the successor to Hugo Chavez, who was the socialist leader of Venezuela, who was very anti-American and called out America on a lot of its BS that it was doing. I have the story right here. Venezuela's Chavez slams Bush on Iraq war. President Hugo Chavez dismissed Washington's concerns that Venezuela's democracy is under threat, saying that a dictatorship led by U.S. President George W. Bush poses a true threat to democracy around the world. I'm not going to read the entire article, but that's the idea. Venezuela has always spoken out against the U.S.'s imperialism when the U.S. invaded Iraq and tried to take their oil, when the U.S. tried to invade Afghanistan to take their resources. So why is Maduro doing the same thing? It's hypocritical all around. I'm going to continue reading here. Mr. Maduro claims that the vast, oil-rich Essequibo region of Guyana, a country of about 800,000, is part of Venezuela, a nation of roughly 28 million people. On Sunday, more than 95% of voters supported that claim in a referendum organized by the government. Venezuela's electoral authority said. Mr. Maduro's argument is based on what many Venezuelans claim or consider an illegitimate agreement dating to the 19th century that gave the Essequibo region to Guyana. Although most countries have accepted that Essequibo belongs to Guyana, the issue remains a point of contention for many Venezuelans, and experts had expected the referendum to be approved. But there were indications Sunday that voter turnout had been low. I want to say this. Let's just keep it real about the borders of Latin America. The borders of Latin America were created, hundreds of years ago, when basically Gran Colombia, the country that was founded by Simon Bolivar, the liberator of South America, he basically fought the Spanish, got the Spanish out of there, but then South America sort of broke apart. At this point in time in history, in the 21st century, 2023, hundreds of years removed from from those events that have happened, border disputes that were done in the colonial era should not be considered actual territorial claims. I mean, Russia has more of a right to say that Ukraine is theirs than Venezuela does to say the Essequibo region is theirs. It doesn't make any sense, honestly. Actually, like these people, and I say this with all the love in my heart, should be actually uniting to create a unified South America, because many of these countries have a lot of cultural similarities. They have the same interests of taking advantage of the natural resources they've been blessed with, like oil, gold, gas, silver, all those sorts of things. The last thing they should be do is warring with each other to fight over territories that were created by colonialists back in the day, or subdivisions of a grand united South America that fell apart, because obviously it didn't work. Going to go back to the story here. So, Mr. Maduro's argument is based on what many Venezuelans consider an illegitimate agreement dating to the 19th century that gave the Essequibo region to Guyana. Although most countries have accepted that Essequibo belongs to Guyana, the issue remains a point of contention for many Venezuelans, and experts had expected the referendum to be approved. But there were indications Sunday that voter turnout had been low. President Irfan Ali of Guyana has said that Essequibo is ours, every square inch of it, and has pledged to defend it. For Mr. Maduro, Maduro stoking a geopolitical crisis provides a way to shift the domestic conversation at a moment when many Venezuelans are pressing for an election that could challenge his hold on power. Maduro needs to wrap himself in the flag for electoral reasons, and obviously a territorial dispute with a neighbor is the perfect excuse, said Phil Gunson, an analyst with the International Crisis Group who lives in Venezuela's capital, Caracas. I hate to see that so many people could potentially lose their lives or lose their homes or lose their sons, their daughters, whatever, just because one man wants to stay in power. This is absolutely a shame. And it's a shame that this continues to happen in so many places around the world. A lot of countries have territorial disputes. I think, Argentina has this area of land off their coast that they want to fight and claim back for the British. Yeah, the Falkland Islands are something that many Argentines believe genuinely belong to them. But Britain put their foot down in the 1980s when Margaret Thatcher was the prime minister and said, nope, you're not going to have it. And they went to war. And many Argentines fought and died over a piece of land that birds just basically shit on. What's the point of that? Should people be dying over land in the 21st century? Honestly, I understand that Israel Palestine is one thing. That's a different thing. But let's keep it real. Fighting over Guyana just to invade it because you believe it's a part of your territory and it was taken from you by imperialists back in the day, does that mean that you can now do imperialism on another group of people? Is that cool? Is that cool? Are we going to lose beautiful Guyanans? Are beautiful Venezuelans going to die just because of territorial disputes, because of empire? Is this really what we want? No. No, Nicolas Maduro should be ashamed of himself. And Chavez is turning in his grave. Chavez spoke against George Bush for doing this same exact thing, invading an oil-rich nation. And what is Maduro trying to do? Invade an oil-rich nation. Going to continue here. Venezuelan groups and activists opposing Mr. Maduro organized a primary vote in October to choose a candidate to run against him in elections that are supposed to be held next year. Though the primary had no official government support, more than 2.4 million Venezuelans cast ballots, a large number that suggests how engaged voters could be in a general election. All right, gonna jump into the comments right here. Ozzy says they discovered lots of oil recently off the coast of Guyana, and unfortunately, that is the reason why Venezuela has even more impetus to want to invade. And it's absolutely wrong. Absolutely wrong. Y'all work together. Besides, Venezuela is a very rich, oil-rich nation. The reason they haven't been able to exploit it, though, is because oil prices go up and down. It's like Venezuela is addicted to something that's going to cause even more problems for them. They base their whole entire economy in Venezuela off oil. And then when oil prices went down and the rest of the world is trying to move to electric vehicles and stuff like that, what did they decide to do? We need more oil. We need more oil. It's ridiculous. How about actually changing the way the economy works? Creating a better system of government that helps the people there and opening up to the rest of the world. I'm going to continue here. All right. But since then, the Maduro government has questioned the primary's legitimacy and has taken legal aim at its organizers, raising concerns that Mr. Maduro will reset any serious challenge to his 10-year tenure, even as his country continues to suffer under international sanctions. Preliminary reports on Sunday suggested that turnout for the Esquibo referendum was far lower than expected, even though public sector employees had been required to vote. New York Times observers saw voting centers that were essentially empty, and experts and social media users reported similar scenes. So it sounds like the people in Venezuela didn't even really care about this vote. And if Venezuela does decide to go and invade Guyana just because 2 million people voted in a country that is very large, I believe Venezuela has around 40 million people or so, that would be a shame and ridiculous, and it's not justified. So this is a huge failure for the government. Benio Alacon, director of a research center at Andres Bello Catholic University in Caracas that conducts voter surveys, said of the turnouts. He added that it was likely that the government's electoral council would falsely inflate voter turnout figures. Mr. Gunson said the turnout was a setback for the ruling party and particularly for Mr. Maduro, even as they tried to present it as a triumph. Okay, so now I'm less worried that the invasion will happen because all the smart people in Venezuela are saying that, you know what, this was actually a failure. The government tried to do this to drum up support for its party, but instead, it backfired because nobody turned out. Nobody cares about that. People don't want to take Guyana. They want food on the tables. They don't want to have Caracas be so violent. That's what people actually care about. I'm going to continue here. It makes the chances of even a semi free and fair election next year even more remote, he said, since they can't afford to go into one of those in this kind of state. Francisca Martinez, 64, a political activist for the ruling party, said she was proud to vote in favor of the referendum. This election is important because this is part of our territory. We cannot allow them to take it away from us, she said. It is our grandchildren's inheritance. No, 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 no. It's a shame that people get so caught up in nationalism. Venezuela has a lot to be proud of. Beautiful women, beautiful beaches. I think the largest waterfall in the world is in Guyana. Great food as well. Venezuela has so much to be proud of. Venezuela fought for its independence and won against the most powerful empire at the time, Spain. Yet and still, what do we want to fight about? We want to die over land. Venezuela's got a lot of oil and a lot of land, and they want even more. All right. Venezuela has so much potential, Ozzy says. Yes, it does. Yet and still, bad government and dictators and hard headed knuckleheads in power make it so that the average people of Venezuela suffer. Going to continue here. Esquibo, a region slightly larger than the state of Georgia, is a tropical jungle rich in oil, as well as minerals and timber. In recent years, many people have migrated there from Venezuela and Brazil to capitalize on the illegal mining industry. So this is a picture of Bartica. I got to keep it real. I went to Bartica. I went to Bartica back in 2015 or 16. I can't remember. I can't remember exactly. But it was crazy. I took a boat down the Esquibo River. It started raining and the boat was covered with plastic tarp and the boat started filling up with water. The guys were pushing it up with sticks and I almost thought I was going to drown. I almost thought I was going to drown. It's crazy. And yeah, that was one of the most dangerous things I ever did. And in Bartica, basically, I was just walking around watching kids play soccer with their shirts off and stuff like that. It was real hood, real crazy place. Guyana is very special, and I hope it's protected. Bartica Esquibo is a gateway to what the Guyanese call the interior, a sparsely populated region of forest and savanna that is rich in natural resources. Guyana has increased its police presence along the Venezuelan border, while Brazil has sent troops to the region. So far, Venezuela has not deployed any additional forces to the border. Thank God. So this is the territory that Venezuela wants to take. They want to take basically more than 2/3 of Guyana and say that it's theirs. It doesn't make any sense, and it's absolutely not fair and right for this country to try to take other people's land just because of oil. I've already said this before, but seriously, Venezuela has so much potential. Ozzy said it too, and what they need to do is actually capitalize on the resources they have. Continuing here, but part of the referendum's language states that the government has to exercise full sovereignty over the Esquibo, and some analysts said its passage could give Mr. Maduro a rationale to launch hostilities. I'm going to continue here. All right. Launch hostilities. Once the referendum is approved, it gives a blank check to Maduro so that he can, at any time, at his discretion, initiate or have any kind of border clash of a military nature in the Esquibo territory, said Rocio San Miguel, a defense analyst in Venezuela who studies the military. And if Mr. Maduro believes he could be defeated in an election, he might activate the war button and suspend elections by declaring a national emergency, Ms. San Miguel said. This is horrible. Beautiful, beautiful Guyanese people will lose their homes, their country, just because one man will lose an election. Total shame. Let's continue here. The modern day dispute over Esquibo dates to around 1899 when a tribunal was held in Paris to determine the boundaries of what was then called British Guyana. Venezuelans say the area had been part of Venezuela when it was a part of the Spanish Empire. But Venezuelans did not take part in the tribunal, and many of the country's citizens consider its decision null and void. So, what the Venezuelans argue is that a long time ago, the British took a piece of Spanish colonial territory, and because they didn't include Venezuelans at the table while they were cutting up the pie, which was South America, they feel like that territory should be theirs. But I have to say this, with that territorial claim, every African nation would be at war with each other. Every African nation would be at war with each other if the argument was the colonialists divided Zambia and South Africa or Zambia and the Congo, whatever. And so, therefore, that territory should be ours because we weren't there at the table. There is an argument to be made there, but I would say that's null and void at this point. Peace is more important than territorial integrity, in my opinion. We don't need people dying over land that only rich people will exploit and take advantage of. Going to jump into the comments. So Ozzy said that's like half the country. What the hell? Yeah, that's crazy. They want to take half of their country. And, I'm sure the Venezuelan people probably won't get caught up in all this. They see through the government's lies. But it's absolutely ashamed that Chavez's legacy is being taken over by an imperialist when Chavez was anti imperialist to the T. Anyway, in 1966, the governments of Britain, British Guyana, and Venezuela signed the Geneva Agreement to settle the boundary dispute. Under the accord, in the case of a stalemate, the dispute will be referred to the United Nations. Since then, the region has been led by an independent Guyana but claimed by Venezuela, though tensions eased under Hugo Chavez, then the Venezuelan president, who suggested that he was not interested in pursuing the issue when he visited Guyana in 2004. But that was before an oil boom turned Guyana's economy into one of the fastest growing in the world. Some of that oil is in the Essequibo region, which makes up about 2/3 of the country's territory. I have to say, when I visited Guyana, there was not much to see or do, honestly, and it was very, very, very poor. But I looked up the same hotel that I stayed in Guyana for about 3 or 4 days. And I think I paid about $60 or $70 in total for those 3 or 4 days. When I looked on booking.com years later for that same hotel, it was $600 for those same 3 or 4 days. It's absolutely changed. Guyana could be a very rich nation. It could be like Dubai in a few years. But unfortunately, their neighbors, Venezuela, who were Dubai for many years, who had tons of money from oil, they're going to try to stop that, unfortunately, if Mr. Maduro has his way. So in 2020, the dispute was taken up by the United Nations top court, the International Court of Justice, where it is still pending. But Mr. Maduro has said that the court does not hold jurisdiction over the issue. The court on Friday ordered Venezuela to refrain from taking any action that would alter Guyana's control over Essequibo. But the court did not ban Venezuela from holding the referendum, as Guyana had sought. Analysts said reviving Venezuela's claim to the territory would most likely prove a temporary distraction and would not increase Mr. Maduro's popularity. People need practical solutions to their everyday needs: food and medicine and education and hospital services and roads. Mr. Gunson said they don't need flag waving. That's not going to put food on the table. So here are the pictures of some Venezuelans. And yes, we are about to talk about the black Venezuelans here because there are a ton of black people in Venezuela, and half of the country of Guyana is black. So we're about to get to that after we read this text. So some analysts drew parallels to a former president of Argentina, Leopold Galtieri, who led during that country's military dictatorship and ordered an invasion of the Falkland Islands in 1982 amid declining popularity. He was defeated by the British military, which led to his removal from power. That's what I was talking about earlier. Yeah, in Argentina, many, many, many years ago, they tried to take a small island that really has no benefit to their nation, and yeah, basically, a lot of Argentines died for nothing. Really silly. The people who live in Essequibo are largely English speaking, identify culturally as Guyanese, and say they want to remain parts of Guyana, the only government most have ever known. Even when it was part of the Spanish Empire, it was considered a remote and undeveloped territory. Many residents say they enjoyed the tranquility of life in Essequibo and the economic benefits from the oil boom, and feared they would have to leave their homes if Venezuela gained sovereignty over the region. If we lose Essequibo, where are we going to live? Said Abdul Rashid, a taxi driver, who said he was happy and proud of how the Guyanese government was handling the situation. Bob Mahadio, a photographer and video editor, said he didn't understand how Venezuela could claim the land when it had been developed by Guyanese. This is our land, he said. Guyanese really have to stand up and fight against these people because this is our hard sweat and earnings here. So, very beautiful writing here. I think this was a very dope story. So, let's get into this. How many black people are in Venezuela? Let's jump into this story. So, Afro Venezuelans are Venezuelans of African descent. Afro Venezuelans are mostly descendants of enslaved Africans brought to the Western Hemisphere during the Atlantic slave trade. This term also sometimes refers to the combining of African and other cultural elements found in Venezuelan society, such as the arts, traditions, music, religion, race, and language. So there are approximately maybe 1,087,000 Afro Venezuelans. And this is what they look like right here. They look like our brothers and sisters, and we love them and we care about them. And they are also dealing with white supremacy that exists in Venezuela. How many Afro Guyanese are there? So 29.3% of Guyana's population is what we would call Afro Guyanese, sisters like her. Mm-mm-mm. So Afro-Guyanese are generally descended from the enslaved people brought to Guyana from the coast of West Africa to work on sugar plantations during the era of the Atlantic slave trade, coming from a wide array of backgrounds and enduring conditions that severely constrained their ability to preserve their respective cultural traditions, contributed to the adoption of Christianity and the values of British colonialists. So both of these people are descended from people who were kidnapped and human trafficked across the globe. And once again, the Afro Guyanese are our brothers and sisters as well. Let's talk about who we should be supporting as Black people in this fight. In this fight, of course, we are always going to be against white supremacy. And we know that white supremacy exists all over Latin America, period, period. In Brazil, where half of the country is Black, never had a Black president. Most of their elected representatives look like the cabinet of Sweden. In many other countries in Latin America, the term negrito or mono, which is calling people monkeys, is used widespread. Widespread throughout Latin America, there is anti Blackness. But in the case of Guyana, I think that we should be on the side of these people because even though they're dealing with racism there in Guyana, we want to make sure that they are not under the thumb of even more virulent racists. In Guyana, the people who perpetuate the most racism against the Afro Guyanese are the Indian Guyanese, which make up a large portion of the people. And many people in Guyana are mixed, meaning they're half Black, half Indian, and that sort of thing. But unfortunately, whenever we exist in large parts of society, we get the short end of the stick because anti Blackness reigns supreme in the minds of many other groups of people who are not Black. So I think we should be supporting the Guyanese people on maintaining their country, their sovereignty, and away from Venezuela, a larger portion of people who are not Black, who are going to invade this Black country, take advantage of their resources, and subjugate them. Did you get what I'm saying? Ozzy said, did you experience anti-Black racism in Guyana? No, I did not exactly. No, I did not. No, I did not. But we're going to be reading about the anti-Black racism that is in Guyana. But when I was in Guyana, the only situation that made me feel a bit uncomfortable was I was in a bus uh, driving through Georgetown, which is the capital there, and a Black person yelled at me, "What's up, my nigga?" And I don't like that. I don't like that. Even when, especially when I go to foreign countries and Black people, call each other niggas and stuff like that. That's not cool for me. That's not cool for me. Because I just generally don't like that word. You hear me use that word, but it's not something that I would just greet a Black person I don't know with. You get what I'm saying? But no, I didn't experience anti-Black racism. But also another situation that I remember in Guyana right now. I was in a taxi cab with my taxi driver. So I went to Guyana. I met some guy who gave me his card and said, if you ever need a ride, hit me up. So I took his card, and whenever I did need a ride, I hit him up. And one time we were driving, and one of his friends got in the car. And I basically asked him, what's racism like in Guyana? Is there a lot of racism here? And he said, by the way, the guy was Mugla, and Muglas are the people in Guyana who are half Indian, half Black. And the driver guy who I called, he was like Indian. He was Indian, right? And the Mugla guy told me that basically, there is racism here, but generally we all get along. But during the election cycle in Guyana, basically the government stirs up the tension between the two groups, between the Indians and the Blacks and that sort of stuff. And this sort of anti-Black racism practiced by Indians is very common in many other island nations. When you go to Mauritius, I covered Mauritius on my channel. It's the biggest video on my channel. The Indians there practice anti-Black racism against the other half of the country. If you go to Trinidad, if you go to Jamaica, if you go to any of the other island Caribbean nations around the world, you'll find a lot of Indians there, and they practice anti-Black racism. So Avery Adams jumped into the chat. He said, what it do, family? What's up? We're out here talking about Guyana possibly being invaded by Venezuela, and we don't want to see beautiful Guyanese people or beautiful Venezuelans lose their lives over a stupid territorial dispute. So I want to read this article right here about anti-Black racism in Venezuela. This is about the Afro-Venezuelan community and their history right here. So let's just jump into this. So because until 2011, Venezuela had not collected data on its Black population since 1920, there's estimates ranging to 7 to 60% of the total population is Afro-Venezuelan. Do you get what I'm saying? So it's a wide margin. We don't really know how many Afro-Venezuelans there are because, they're not actually counting. let's go here. So, the historical context: the enslaved Africans were transported to Venezuela mostly in the 18th century to work on the numerous cocoa plantations. Despite proposals by Simon Bolivar, the liberator, slavery was not abolished until independence in 1811, but rather some 40 years later with the law of abolition of slavery of 1854. So, I find that very interesting that Simon Bolivar, the guy who was fighting to liberate South America, didn't liberate the black people who helped him fight for his liberation. Simon Bolivar, the guy who made sure that Peru, all the way to Argentina and many other Spanish speaking Latin American countries got their freedom, he got help from the Haitians who supplied him weapons and manpower. Didn't decide in return to free the black people who were working in plantations all over Latin America. Not cool at all. Not cool at all. So here are some of the current issues that Afro-Venezuelans are dealing with. Historically, urban and rural Afro-Venezuelans have not identified themselves in ethnic terms, but rather according to their class and geographic position. This may be due to a general lack of consciousness, but may also be an explicit denial of blackness because it is devalued in this society. Due to increased mobilization by local NGOs, Afro-Venezuelans and youth in particular are beginning to reaffirm their identity and culture. I want to zoom in here so y'all can read the text with me. Hold up, hold up. So, despite the existence of some notable Afro-Venezuelans in high-level positions in the government and private sector, Afro-Venezuelans continue to be the victims of discrimination and racial prejudice. This discrimination can be especially violent in poorer areas where police forces still often act with impunity and racial profiling is rampant. Moreover, nearly 40% of Venezuelans live under the poverty line, and the concentration of people of African descent in poorer regions and neighborhoods suggests that poverty rates are higher among this population. So, this is a big problem. This is a big problem in Venezuela. A lot of poor people exist in Venezuela, but who are the majority of the poor people, or a very large disproportionate portion of the poor people? Afro-Venezuelans. And showing that demonstrates hands down that anti-blackness exists in Venezuela. And this is something that needs to be combated. And we don't want Venezuela spreading their anti-black racism to Guyana, a country that has a very large portion of black people. Not cool at all, Venezuela. You got to change it up. So, furthermore, the community struggles for acceptance and recognition. Many Venezuelans do not regard Afro-Venezuelans as a distinct group, and the government still has no official data on their numbers. However, music and other cultural forms of expression have helped the community gain some visibility in recent years. An important milestone for the community came in 2011, when for the first time the community were able to self-identify as Afro-descendants in the national census. Until then, there had been no official classification for the community. So we need to see more help for the Afro-Venezuelans, because let's keep it real. A lot of Venezuelans look like this, but we also have a lot of Venezuelans that look like this. And I'm pretty sure the sisters and brothers in Venezuela who look like this face a ton of anti-black racism. Avery Adams jumped into the chat. Shout out to Avery. He said, "My ex from Venezuela, I'm about to give a shit." That's funny, man. But Venezuelans got some good food. They got some good food, and also the reputation of Venezuelans abroad is that they're very beautiful people. They spend a lot of money on cosmetic surgery and that sort of thing. They're also very hardworking people too, in my opinion. Living in Miami, I saw a lot of Venezuelans work very hard and stuff like that. Avery Adams says this is a great thing to bring up. I didn't know this. So yeah, let's talk about this. So in Venezuela, they hate on Afro hair. This is one thing that we have to consider, embracing the Afro in revolt against Venezuela's bad hair stereotype. So this is a report from France 24. 2 years ago, Victoria Mejias abandoned her slavish pursuit of sleek tresses, a common obsession in Venezuela where hair and race identity are closely intertwined. After a near 2-decade struggle with damaging chemical straighteners, she embraced her naturally curly hair and a bold shoulder-length Afro style and says she feels divine. From the age of 12, when her mother started relaxing her hair, I felt obliged to present myself in a certain way because straight hair gives you status. Mejias, now 28, explained at a salon in central Caracas where she was treating herself to a moisturizing treatment. Of course, this is a tradition of a society that has anti-blackness in them. Whenever black people grow our hair naturally, afros, cornrows, braids, dreads, whatever, people say that's ugly, that's not professional, that's unstandardized. These sorts of things need to be stopped. We need to always combat this. And I feel for all the Afro people in the Caribbean and also in Latin America because they're dealing with this sort of stuff all the time, getting told that their afros are nappy, that their nose is nasty, that how they look, how we as black people naturally look is nasty. And this sort of mind state exists in Venezuela as well, where the beauty standards are very long, straight black hair, and not and no African features unless we're talking about big booties. Everybody wants the big African booty, but nobody wants to be the big African carrying the booty. Gonna jump into the comments here. So Ozzy said, I could be wrong, but I think Maduro has a lot of support from Afro Venezuelans, though compared to the opposition. I think that could be true because keep it real, Venezuela has like a socialist government, and many of these socialist governments, Ozzy, probably give a lot of food and money to the poor people. And unfortunately, many of the people in Venezuela who are poor are Afro Venezuelans. So probably they support him, but they probably don't support the idea of invading another country and taking their oil. Because think about this as well. A number of poor people are the ones who usually fill up the ranks of the army. If not, they're put at the front line and that sort of stuff. So Afro Venezuelans are probably thinking, we don't want to go to war with Guyana because who's going to be the ones mostly to die? The poor, working class, black Afro Venezuelans. Gonna jump back into the story here. So this girl, Mahias, Afro-Venezuelan, says she felt ashamed of her pelo malo, bad hair, as natural black hair is called in Venezuela, a symptom, some say, of deep-seated racism. Pelo malo, pelo malo. Pelo malo, bad hair. Kinky hair is not bad hair. Nappy hair is not bad hair. Having 4C hair is not bad hair. We need to kill all these ideas. This sister has beautiful hair, even though she straightened it out. And maybe it's a wig, maybe it's a lace front. I don't know. But under that, there's beautiful hair. And I covered this on my channel a few weeks ago, talking about how these straighteners and all these chemical products to make black people change our hair is giving us cancer. We need to stop that. So Ozzy jumped into the comments. Lots of parallels between Venezuela and Cuba. Absolutely. So then she had a change of heart, the Afro Venezuelan girl. I was tired of salons for straightening treatments and not having the freedom to let my hair get wet as it would frizz. It felt like a form of slavery, she told AFP. Changing to an Afro style was like meeting me again. It was the best decision I could have made. Shout outs to her. It's good for black women to wear their natural hair. If I ever have a daughter, she has to wear her natural hair, not letting her perm her hair as long as she's in my house. As long as anybody is in my house, there's no chemicals, there's no straighteners, there's none of that. None of that. We love our African roots. We love our black features. That's what we do. So, Venezuela has a racially diverse population as a result of mixing between indigenous peoples, Spanish conquistadors who arrived in the 15th century, and the African slaves they brought from the colonies. The country also received an influx of Europeans escaping the ravages of World War II and people from other Latin American countries fleeing dictatorships and armed conflict over the decades. Today, more than half of the population identifies as mixed race or mestizo, yet it is widely accepted that the darker your skin, the likelier you are to be poor in Venezuela and to suffer from prejudice. Interesting, very interesting. We are not surprised by that idea. But for all of these Latin American countries, a lot of them say, we don't see color. We're all moreno. We're all, mixed up, all this sort of stuff. Then how come in all of these countries, the darker you are in Brazil, the darker you are in Peru, the darker you are in Venezuela, Colombia, you end up poor. You end up on the lower strata of society. That's not cool at all. So, not with that hair. Despite a 2011 law against racial discrimination in Venezuela, the country has a complicated relationship with its cultural identity. Racism is sometimes overt, often subliminal. In Venezuela, everything that comes from being black, we think of as bad or as exotic, that is, not the norm. Sociologist Zulima Paredes, who has written about the aesthetics of Afro hair, told AFP. The country that has enjoyed outsized success in the world of beauty pageants has won the Miss Universe title 7 times. See, I told you. I told you a lot of Venezuelans, they win the Miss Universe contest, man. It's a lot of plastic surgery, man. Unfortunately, I think a lot of Venezuelan women get plastic surgery because, unfortunately, a lot of them have no way out of the poverty that's so grinding in Venezuela. So a lot of them get sponsors, a lot of them get sugar daddies, a lot of them go into the sex industry, unfortunately. And I think that's why female beauty is put on such a high standard in Venezuela. So this here looks like an Afro Venezuelan woman here, right here. She looks very mixed, but I can see our people when I see them. So all its winning contestants were fair-skinned and had straight or straightened hair, reflecting the nation's continued pursuit of a Western European beauty standard. In 2018, when dark-haired, olive-skinned model Isabella Rodriguez was crowned Miss Venezuela, her tresses, also artificially straightened, she was ridiculed online for her modest background and her mixed race roots. Hair discrimination also has more practical day-to-day implications. Paredes, who is also of mixed race, said she suffered workplace discrimination over her hair. Once applying for a job while sporting an afro, they told me, look, no, with this hair, you want supremacy in play. And the victimization starts young. You cannot enter school with an afro hairstyle. You have to tie it up or straighten it under many prevailing dress codes, said hairdresser Gabriela Delgado. Under such indoctrination, she herself used long, straight hair extensions until 4 years ago when she decided to switch to dreadlocks. Hair cannot be bad. There are people who start relaxing their hair as young as 6 or 5, said Delgado's colleague Ludze Gardona, 35. The pair work at Afro Caracas, a salon specializing in black hairstyles. People have not yet shaken off the stereotype that black people were slaves and not much else. These prejudices are what we are trying to change. We have to become strong, said Delgado. So the black people in Latin America are very strong and very resilient people. They're just like us in the Americas. They fought against white supremacy. They never just took slavery laying down. Those people, those men, those women are also our heroes. We look up to them, like Gaspar Yanga in Mexico and so many of the others, Zuma in Brazil. So many other slave revolts were led by very strong and powerful black people in the Latin American region, and we will always support them, continuing on as they fight white supremacy, which is why I'm throwing my lot in with Guyana, and I think you should too. I don't get any money from Guyana. I never even got any anything special from Guyana. Nothing at all. Nothing at all. But I'm just saying here, if we really love black people, if we really love black people, we should be demanding that Venezuela stand down and not invade a black country. And we should ask that other nations stand up with Guyana against this imperialism that Venezuela is threatening against their people. It's not cool at all, in my opinion. I care more about Venezuela invading Guyana than I ever will about Israel and Palestine. Facts. I care more about Venezuela possibly killing and murdering hundreds of thousands, if not millions, of Guyanese people, because who knows how many Guyanese people really there are. I care more about that than I ever will about Israel and Palestine. Facts. So, gonna jump back into the story here. This is the Afro-Venezuelan woman saying this. This hair has not hurt anyone. It cannot be bad. The issue was tackled in the 2013 Venezuelan film Pelo Malo about a young boy's obsession with straightening his hair, which won the Best Film Award at the San Sebastian Film Festival. I'm gonna look into that film. I definitely want to see it. Pelo Malo. I like a good foreign film. Venezuela is not the only country to have struggled with the issue. In 2019, South Africa's Zonzibini Tunzi became the first black woman with a short, natural haircut to be crowned Miss Universe. I want to reassure people that this hair is as beautiful as any other hair, she said at the time. In July 2019, California became the first U.S. state to ban discrimination based on a person's natural hair in a law that stated that hair was a frequent reason for racial discrimination, particularly for black people. Very interesting text. I would love to know what you guys think about it. Jump off in the chat. Let me know what you think. Got to take a quick water break. Anyway, so this racism that exists in Venezuela is not just, them hating on people's hair. They are actually literally killing people. They are literally killing people. We think, only in America the police shoot black people in the back or beat us up unfairly or jail us unfairly. No, 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 no. It happens all across the world, and Venezuela is no exception. In Venezuela, they are specifically targeting us, darker skinned people. It's not cool. Yes, this does happen in Guyana as well. We will cover that. But let's read this right here. And by the way, guys, I won't be doing another live stream until I hit 2,345 subscribers. So if you want to see more of this, you got to share this content, get other people on it, that sort of thing. Racism and state violence in Venezuela today. Professor Kamor Avila of the Institute of Criminal Sciences at the Central University of Venezuela discusses lethal state violence. Venezuela's security forces kill thousands of racialized and impoverished young people every year. And we have to remember, when they say racialized, they mean black. They mean brown skinned people. They mean dark skinned people. They mean people that look like me and possibly you. That's what they're talking about here. They send their thugs and their guards and their police officers out there to brutalize poor black people. Let's go here. So, Professor Kemar Avila is a researcher at the Institute of Criminal Sciences at the Central University of Venezuela and a professor of criminology at the same university. He is one of the foremost scholars and critics of institutional violence and criminal justice policies in Venezuela. In this interview, Venezuelan Workers' Solidarity members Elvira Blanco and Alejandro Curiat asked him about the nexus between racism and state violence in the Latin American country. Elvira Blanco and Alejandro Curiat at the present under Nicolas Maduro's regime. How do you police or security forces interact with groups racialized, black people, or oppressed by racism? How do these forces respond when these groups organize for their rights? When we denounce that in Venezuela, police forces have been carrying out a drop by drop massacre against young people in popular sectors, we are referring to a racialized and poor youth. Here, the criminal justice system is as racist, as classist as in any other countries in the region. The main difference should lie in its high levels of deadly force. In the specific cases of Venezuela, the security forces have been marked from their origins by their militarization, their instrumentalization by political parties, and their excesses against the popular classes. The military logic that imposed itself on the confrontation with the leftist armed struggle of the 1960s and 70s, with thousands of cases of violations of human rights, was displaced in the following years to the daily practices of security forces. Cases like the pits of death, the massacres at El Amparo, or the repression of the 1989 Carrasco rebellion would become emblematic of the last decades of the 20th century. So Ozzy jumped into the comments. Ozzy said, "Damn, I thought Maduro was an ally." Yeah, Maduro might use the words and language of allies and anti-American imperialism and leftism and sort of that. But what do the Venezuelan state? What does the Venezuelan state actually do? They murder their own civilians, just like any other authoritarian government around the world. Let's not get caught up in following people's words. What they are doing is brutalizing and murdering poor people, black people, brown people in their territory. Gonna jump in here. So, the 21st century in Venezuela came with promises of a radical change and a rupture with the past. However, what ensued was a continuity and a deepening of everything that was already profoundly wrong. According to official data, analyzed in our studies between 2010 and 2018, over 23,688 people died at the hands of security forces. 23,000 people were killed by the police in Venezuela from 2010 to 2018. Think about that, man. Think about that, man. Those are staggering numbers. That's war zone numbers. Those are war zone numbers, man. 69% of these cases happened between 2016 and 2018. So the majority of happened in a 2-year span. The rate of homicides by state agents multiplied by a factor of 6 between 2010 and 2018, reaching up to 16.6 per 100,000 inhabitants. The number is higher than the total rates of homicide in most other countries. That's insane. Now, some people are going to say, oh, Venezuela is a violent nation that has a lot of drug dealing going on and criminal gangs and that sort of thing. That might be true. That might be true. But yet and still, the state doing those sorts of numbers, if you kill 23,000 people, there shouldn't be gangs left at all, period. Period. So a lot of those people possibly were just what we see with George Floyd and Ahmaud Arbery and Sean Bell and so many other cases where black men are brutalized by police or security forces or people acting as such. In 2018, 14 Venezuelan people in 2018, 14 Venezuelan young people died every day on average at the hands of the police. Wow. The share of these cases in relation to the total number of violent deaths also climbed in that same period from 4% to 33%. This means that presently, 1 out of 3 homicides that happen in the country is a consequence of the intervention of state security forces. This in a country whose homicide rates of 50 per 100,000 might already be considered a slaughter. In 2018, 14 Venezuelan young people died every day on average at the hands of the police. Now, do we want Venezuela taking over Guyana? Do you think a country that murders 23,000 of its own citizens, the police do that? Do you think that they will be very nice to Guyana, a country full of poor, brown, black people? No, 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 no. To get an idea of the dimensions of this problem, consider that in Brazil, this class of homicides totals about 7% of the total number. In 2017, Venezuela suffered more deaths from public force intervention than its neighbors, whose population is 7 times greater. Brazil had 4,670 deaths, Venezuela 4,998. In another striking contrast, human rights data analyst Patrick Ball estimates that between 8 and 10% of all homicides in the United States are a consequence of security forces intervention. In Venezuela, that percentage is 3 times higher. So even though we talk about the police shooting black men in the back or killing unarmed civilians a lot, we have said about it in the US because often when the police kill us, we say, you know what, there's going to be no repercussions for that officer. That officer gets to skate off and get his pension. He won't do a day in jail, anything like that. That's what we often say. And that's why we have Black Lives Matter protests. That's why we go marching out in the streets. That's why we want legislation passed. But keep it real. If we were in Venezuela, it would be like war against the police. It would be like the state versus all of us, which is what's happening in Venezuela. Absolutely insane. So these are some of the summaries that characterize the current government. Far from weakening it, these dynamics actually strengthen it because it operates with a necropolitical logic. As material conditions of life deteriorate, life itself seems to also lose its value. In that process, the government exercises greater and more effective controls over the population. The more of it is accused of being authoritarian and dictatorial, of generating terror, the viler it becomes. That is when its main political capital lies. Its legitimacy is not found in votes or in the people's will, but in the unlimited exercise of power and force. Fear is one of its main tools. This is very interesting, but this is a very dense test. I'm going to jump here. So it is, I'm going to jump to this part. State repression is always critical. So, what consciousness is there in Venezuela about racism in the United States, the Black Lives Matter movement, and the ongoing rebellion? What meaning do discussions about these movements take in the Venezuelan political context? So, I'm thankful for this question because it allows me to say several things that I think are important and that I don't see addressed in public discussions. So, he's answering the question here that, you know what? Black Lives Matter is happening. People are fighting against anti-Black racism in the U.S., the most influential nation in the world. How are Venezuelans interpreting this, contextualizing this, and seeing this? And how are they going to respond to this? Because the whole world in 2020 was on our side. So how did this happen here? So we see sectors that condemn police violence in the U.S., but legitimize and justify the slaughters that security forces carry out in Venezuela. These sectors are mirrored by those who justify police violence in the U.S., but vehemently condemn it in Venezuela. In the end, the fans of Trump and Maduro are quite similar on these topics, as they both follow structurally authoritarian, repressive, and anti-democratic projects. They may define themselves as antagonistic, but they rather complement and legitimize each other, using each other's excesses in their propaganda to cover up or justify their own crimes. In Venezuela, for instance, the government uses the terrible case of George Floyd in its tirades and propaganda against the U.S. government, with the end of seducing some well-meaning dupes among international progressives. With this, they distract attention from the disaster they have made in the country and the massacres that their own security bodies execute. So yeah, they're going to say, look how the U.S. is brutalizing Black people, but then make people turn a blind eye to how the Venezuelan police are slaughtering its own citizens. So on the side of the more traditional opposition, Black Lives Matter will not be well received because in the end, these are conservative, racist, and classist sectors that agree with the types of excess against the excluded. They will only raise their voices when the victims are their own militants, middle-class youth in the context of political demonstration, or when it is beneficial for their own media agenda. They care very little about the deaths of thousands of racialized and impoverished young people caused by police interventions. So I think that race consciousness is still in a state of gestation in Venezuela. The left in our country is predominantly and primarily conservative and Eurocentric. It does not ask itself these questions because race does not fit well into its cheat sheet of class struggle. Moreover, much of the left is in the process of self-destruction, having been co-opted by the government's apparatuses, logic, and rhetoric. Hence, their oscillation between justifications, denying reality, and an abetting silence towards the state's excesses and human rights violations. Only minority sectors with little weight remain active in struggle. Fortunately, the international left and progressive sectors are becoming increasingly aware of what is really happening in Venezuela, and little by little have been putting aside automatic solidarities toward its government. So this is a very interesting interview, and I highly suggest that people read it. All the links are in the description of this video. And listen, I don't want people from Venezuela to get mad at me, feeling like I'm beating up on the Venezuelan people or their society or culture. There's a lot of good things about Venezuela, like there is about Colombia, Ecuador, Peru, all these nations. But anti Black racism needs to be called out, and anti Black violence always needs to be called out wherever it happens. So I suggest that people read this article from this very smart man who's talking. And I don't want people to think that I'm only picking on Venezuela, because, like I said at the beginning of the video, anti-Black racism exists in every society. And in this article here from the New York Times, they talk about how in Guyana, the people went on a race riot against Black people in that country as well. So I'm going to leave that article there for people that want to read it. I'm going to cut this stream short because I feel a little bit like I'm ranting with y'all. But I want to hear what y'all think about this. Should I cut this short? Should I just read this last article? What y'all think? I'm going to take a quick water break. Mm, mm. All right. So Ozzy says, keep going. Keep going. All right. So this is the last article that we're going to read. Last article we're going to read. Killing reignites racial tension in Guyana. Like we saw before, 29% of Guyana's population is of Black African descent, and a large proportion are Indian. They practice anti Black racism. So let's go into what happened here. So, the South American country, already deeply split by a presidential election and an oil windfall, is tested again as 3 teenagers are slain. So, here are more pictures of the Afro Guyanese people here. Beautiful people. Some are Muslim, some are Christian, some are whatever, but they are all melanated and lovely. So this was written by Nafiza Yaha Sakura and Antolia Kurmanev, published in 2020 for the New York Times. So Cotton Tree, Guyana. The gruesome murders of 2 teenagers and the apparent reprisal killing of a third have plunged Guyana into its worst racial unrest in years, coming just weeks after the nation emerged from a disputed election that had deeply divided its 2 dominant groups over the country's newfound oil wealth. The unrest is raising fears of a return to the violence between Guyanese of Indian and African descent that split the small South American nation in the 1960s and has unsettled it periodically since. President Irfan Ali, who took office in August after a months-long standoff over the election results, said he would call on Britain and Caribbean nations to help investigate the killings to ensure impartiality. This is basically 2 countries living under the same roof, said Ralph Ramkaran, a veteran Guyanese politician who ran unsuccessfully for Congress in March as an independent on a multi-race platform. You don't have people who are trusted by both sides. There's no Mandela here. That's the thing, man. Guyana is really split between the Indians and the Blacks there, unfortunately. And even though a lot of the people are beautiful like this, unfortunately, a lot of the people who are Indian think like this, like white supremacists, unfortunately. Let's go back here. The discovery on Sunday of the mutilated bodies of 2 Black teenagers in an agricultural area populated predominantly by Indo-Guyanese has reignited racial tensions still simmering from the election. The Guyanese police quickly ruled out political motives and detained 7 people, but they have not disclosed what led up to the killings. So Isaiah Henry left and his cousin Joel Henry were killed near coconut fields last weekend. This is sad that these young Black boys lost their lives to senseless, racist violence that happened in Guyana. The Indian community there should be ashamed, and anybody who knows about their murderers should be called out, because this is unacceptable. So groups representing Afro-Guyanese immediately labeled the killings a hate crime and called on supporters to protest. Hundreds of Afro-Guyanese residents took to the streets this week in the northeastern Berbice region where the murders took place, blocking roads, burning trucks, and attacking Indo-Guyanese passerbys and businesses. The violence escalated on Wednesday when the police said a 17-year-old Indo-Guyanese man, a grandson of one of the detainees, was killed while traveling to his farm near one of the protest sites. Another Indo-Guyanese man was beaten to death after opening fire on protesters later that day, the police said. So this is crazy. But the Guyanese, the Afro-Guyanese, are not taking this laying down. They're not like, I'm not going to say that, but I'm just going to say it's good to see that them standing up and fighting back. If they throw rocks, we shoot rockets. So These callous murders are not seen as isolated. The Guyana Human Rights Association said in a statement. Both sides are quick to see them as a continuation of earlier ethnic upheavals. The March presidential election had taken on strong racial overtones, with the two main parties mobilizing supporters by claiming they would be excluded from oil profits if their side lost. The incumbent, David Granger, whose APNU, AFC party, whatever, draws support primarily from Afro Guyanese, narrowly lost to Mr. Ali, whose president's Progressive Party is backed in large part by Indo Guyanese. I want to show y'all Ifran Ali. Ifran Ali is very dark himself, man. It's crazy because when you see the Afro Guyanese and the Indo Guyanese, they're very similar. And I think this man might be of mixed descent, like many Indo Guyanese are. This is the president of Guyana, very dark skinned man. And many of the Indians I saw in Guyana were not light skinned. They were brought there, by the way. The Indo Guyanese were brought to, and they were slaves too. And many of the slaves that they brought from India to Guyana were like the lower caste of India. And as you know, in India, they practice a different form of anti-black racism called the caste system. So the darker Indians that were brought to Guyana are the ones that populate the nation today. The stakes in the election were high, fueled by a string of massive oil discoveries. Guyana's economy is expected to expand about 50% this year, according to the World Bank, making it the fastest growing economy in the world, battered by the coronavirus. So, Mr. Ali, South America's first Muslim head of state, tried to diffuse tensions this week by appealing for unity, pledging justice, and seeking outside help. But when he tried to visit the families of the first two victims on Tuesday, an army escorted convoy sent ahead was turned back after being blocked and heckled by protesters. His presidential opponent, Mr. Granger, who had reluctantly conceded to Mr. Ali last month under international pressure, has backed the protest. We have to establish some self defense in our society to protect our children, protect our women, protect our young people. Mr. Granger, a former Army brigadier, told reporters this week after visiting the families of the first two victims, Isaiah Henry 16 and Joel Henry 17. Unless we protect ourselves, nobody is going to protect us. Absolutely. The Afro Guyanese have the right idea. They have the same idea that the Black Panthers have. We need to protect ourselves and protect our community and protect our children in a world that is inherently hostile to black life and black expression. Ozzy jumped into the comments. He says, I wonder which party the U.S. supports or prefers. I'm not sure. I'm not sure. And I think the U.S. just wants to support whichever party will allow offshore drilling and U.S. companies to make billions of dollars out of Guyana's oil. That's what I think. Guyana's Afro and Indo Guyanese communities each point to a history of persecution, a legacy of slavery and forced labor in the former British sugar colony to justify their mutual fear. The Indo Guyanese, who arrived as indentured laborers, dominate business and agriculture, while the descendants of the enslaved Africans form the majority of the public sector and security forces. Each, when out of power, has cited mistreatment at the hands of the other. Very interesting. So I take back what I said about the Indo Guyanese being descendants of slaves. They aren't the descendants of slaves, they're the descendants of indentured laborers, just like they were in Mauritius, in Trinidad, Jamaica, wherever. So racism is connected to political power in Guyana, said Deodat Pesawad, a member of the government's Ethnic Relations Committee, in a phone interview with the Berbice region. Political violence in Guyana dates back to the country's struggle for independence in the 1960s, when declassified CIA documents show the United States investigated a campaign of civil unrest to prevent a Marxist Indo-Guyanese leader, Chedi Jagan, from taking power. Hundreds of Indo-Guyanese died in the violence, and tens of thousands fled the country. I am not surprised. Ozzy, I think you got your answer right there. The U.S. is against whichever left wing party there was in Guyana. I'm pretty sure the CIA killed Chedi Jagan or made sure that he couldn't come into power or exiled him or something like that. It's a shame and it's an embarrassment that the U.S. has its hand involved in so much evil in the world in our foreign policy. I want to apologize to the people Guyana. I'm sorry that my country said, you know what, whoever you elect for president, we have to check their boxes first. I apologize, man. Sorry, Guyana. Hope we make it up to you. Anyway, let's go here. Violence flared again in the early 2000s when more than 400 people, mostly Afro Guyanese, died in street battles between criminal gangs affiliated with the main political parties and security forces. The killing of these three teenagers are reopening those historical wounds. The Henrys, who were cousins, had disappeared on Saturday while going to nearby fields to pick coconuts. Their bodies were found the following day with multiple lacerations, the police said. An X was cut into the back of Isaiah's head and forehead, while Joel's chest was cut open. On Wednesday, protesters ambushed the young Indo-Guyanese man, Haresh Singh, beating him to death and setting fire to his motorbike, his family said. The police said Mr. Singh died from trauma to the head and neck, but did not offer further details. Bordered by Venezuela to the west and Brazil to the south, Guyana has been one of South America's poorest countries. But from today's trickle of oil, Guyana's output is expected to reach 1.1 million barrels by 2030, according to estimates by the consultancy Rystad Energy, and oil revenue per capita would rival that of some Gulf states. Many of Guyana's civic and business leaders hope that peace lies in the country's nascent oil wealth, unleashing economic growth that will lift all boats. Yet 9 months after the start of oil production, the fruits of the oil wealth have been largely limited to a few upmarket communities and hotel developments located 100 miles off Guyana's coast. The oil wells generate few local jobs and employ mostly foreign experts. Even their meals are mostly imported. In contrast, the country's main source of employment, construction, agriculture, and fishing, have been battered by the pandemic and the political crisis. Bank lending, an indicator of economic confidence, has barely grown this year, even as oil production shot up. Rather than bringing the country together, some Guyanese fear that oil will stir long-standing resentments and divide it furthermore. More money, more problems. More money, more problems. So yeah, basically most of the police in Guyana are Afro-Guyanese, which is interesting, very interesting, because usually, if you have a racist society, you don't want black people, black men in particular, to have that sort of power and leverage over a society. Very interesting that they did that way. So, on Tuesday, protesters in a village called Number 28 burned a barbershop owned by an Indo-Guyanese man, Kevin Pittman. I am still in shock and hurt. It was my only source of income, Mr. Pittum said. I am good with everybody and we get along well. As the unrest spreads, the victims' families fear the racial tensions are overshadowing their clamor for justice. This is not about race or religion or political things, Gladstone Henry, the father of Isaiah, told reporters. We want justice for these youths, these little boys that had a whole life ahead of them. The nation cannot be against one another, Mr. Henry said, because this is going on too long. Yeah, this needs to stop. The violence in Guyana needs to stop against the Afro-Guyanese and also against the Indo-Guyanese. The racism against the Afro-Venezuelans needs to stop. We need to love and appreciate each other. Venezuela's got a ton of oil and a ton of other natural resources like this. Guyana has a ton of beautiful people that need to be protected and loved and cherished, and we need to value them as a part of our global black community. And we don't want to die over stupid land disputes. It's not worth it. But if Venezuela does decide to invade Guyana, every black person around the world should be incensed, should be enraged, and they should care about this as much as black people want to do stupid stuff to show that they support Palestine or Israel. Israel and Palestine are both racist states, racist regions that have inherent anti-blackness in them. Y'all want to get on Twitter and get on Facebook or protest against your job or not buy Starbucks because racist ass Palestine, where they call black people slaves, is what you want to stand for. And you want to make sure that you want to let everybody know that you support Israel. Meanwhile, Ethiopians and Eritreans are getting beat over the head by Israeli police. Y'all black people want to go and go so ham for Israel. But if Venezuela decides to invade a black ass country like Guyana and bring their evil form of anti-black racism with them, y'all are going to be silent. Well, I won't. I won't at all. I won't at all. By the way, I got to say this. Fuck Nicolas Maduro, fuck his government, and I hope the people of Venezuela finally are able to elect and eject his ass out of office. My name is Simon Hill. Thank you for watching. Next live stream at 2,345 subs. Next video at 2,340 subs. Y'all hit the like button, share this content. Peace.